The shuttle smile. They thought firing me would be the end of the story. What they didn't know was that I had written the final chapter months ago.
My name is Alara Wynn, and for 18 years I was the quiet force behind Carrion Technology's most critical systems. I wasn't the one on stage. I wasn't the one whose name showed up in the newsletters. But every process, every data flow, every operational heartbeat of that company ran on the infrastructure I built. Then the new CEO arrived. Philip Crane. Hungry for control. Uncomfortable with anything he couldn't dominate. Someone like me. Silent. Precise. And holding the keys to the company's core didn't fit into his picture. So on a Monday morning, he made his move. 9:40 a.m. I walked into the executive conference room with my notes and the system audit I had spent the entire weekend preparing. I wasn't expecting applause, but I also wasn't expecting a public execution wrapped in polite silence. Philip sat at the head of the table like a king on display. The leadership team was already seated, including Savannah, the woman I once trained from scratch, when she didn't even know how to launch a test environment. "Alara," Philip said, his voice smooth, almost performative. "Let's make this quick." And then came the sentence. "Your position at Carrion is being dissolved. Effective immediately." No gasps. No objections. Just that suffocating corporate quiet, where everyone pretends not to see the cruelty happening in real time. Savannah didn't meet my eyes. Philip slid a severance envelope toward me like it was the check at a dinner table. "HR will assist with your exit before noon." I didn't sit. I didn't touch the envelope, because I already knew this was coming. Sentinel, the system core I designed and privately owned, had been programmed to respond if my credentials were ever revoked under hostile conditions. When triggered, it would begin a silent freeze of Carrion's back-end systems. Not loud, not explosive. Just a slow shutdown layer by layer until everything started to fracture. They thought they were removing an employee. In reality, they had just unplugged their own nervous system. I placed my badge on the table, looked Philip directly in the eye. "I understand," I said. Then I walked out past Savannah, past the people who once applauded my system launch, past the ones who now couldn't look at me. The door closed behind me, and the smile began to form. Not a smile of joy, a smile of certainty. The countdown had already started. The architect in the shadow. When I stepped into the elevator that Monday morning, just minutes after being publicly dismissed, I didn't fall apart. I didn't run to the parking lot, and I didn't call a lawyer. I simply pressed the button for the ground floor, held my breath for a count of 3, and exhaled. This wasn't panic. This was protocol. The ride down gave me time to think, though I didn't really need to. The plan had already been set in motion the moment Philip Crane signed my termination order. What no one in that building understood was that I wasn't just another employee. Years ago, long before Carrion Technologies became a rising force in enterprise logistics, it was a failing startup on the verge of collapse. The infrastructure was chaos, overlapping systems, leaking data, vendors walking away. I was brought in as a contractor, tasked simply with stabilizing the mess. But I did more than stabilize it. I designed and deployed Sentinel, an internal relay layer that lived quietly between every major transaction, routing, validating, and securing data across departments without ever calling attention to itself. There was no launch announcement, no slide deck, no marketing language. It was simply the silent logic that held everything together. And as the company recovered, as deals poured in, as investors praised Carrion's technological reliability, no one ever questioned where that stability came from. Because Sentinel didn't exist on Carrion's servers. From the very beginning, I recognized the instability inside the organization. Political shifts, leadership turnover, ego-driven decision-making. So I didn't embed Sentinel directly into Carrie-Anne's core. Instead, I deployed it through a secure external server cluster, registered under my own LLC, disguised beneath ordinary hosting records. Legally, I owned Sentinel. Technically, I controlled every line of it. They used it every day. They simply never realized it was never theirs. And they never asked, because Sentinel never failed. When I was promoted to lead systems architect, I kept Sentinel out of official documentation entirely. It became the invisible spine of the company's operations. Even Savannah, who shadowed me for 6 months, never questioned the Ghost Protocol alerts that only I received. Then, Philip Crane arrived. I recognized the signs immediately. The polished language of cost optimization, the strategic consolidation of authority, the subtle rewriting of history to elevate new leadership. He wasn't building anything. He was preparing to replace everything he didn't personally control. So, I embedded a silent contingency directive into Sentinel. If my credentials are revoked without Sentinel reauthorization, begin a gradual system shutdown. Not a crash, not a dramatic collapse. Just enough to break everything slowly. So no, when Philip smiled across the conference table during my firing, I wasn't afraid. He thought he was removing a name from an org chart. He didn't realize he was disconnecting Carrion from its own spine. The elevator chimed. I walked through the lobby, past the receptionist who didn't look up. The morning air outside was sharp and cold. I took out my phone, not to call anyone, but to check Sentinel's activity log. The sequence had already begun. 2 days later, HR sent a follow-up email. They didn't call it being fired. Oh no, corporate language prefers to wound indirectly. Effective immediately, your role is being redefined as a temporary technical advisor under CTO oversight. No office, no team, no direct reports. Just a shared desk buried in a forgotten corner of the second floor. No nameplate, no wired network access. My badge still worked, but only on select floors. And in the company directory, my title now displayed: Consultant, Infrastructure, Temper 2. They didn't have to say it outright. I understood exactly what they were trying to do. They were attempting to erase me from the picture. What they didn't understand was, I'm the one who built the picture. The new blood. It was obvious I wasn't being transitioned. I was being erased. Meanwhile, Philip was busy repainting Carrion into something shiny and hollow filled with buzzwords, soft launch posters, and a team that looked like they'd been recruited from a startup fashion campaign. I met them for the first time during a company-wide town hall that week. Philip stood center stage, beaming as he introduced his new tech visionaries, hand-picked, bright-eyed, overly enthusiastic recruits, most of them from his former firm. They all dressed in minimalist neutrals and spoke in phrases like cross-functional innovation and next-gen workflow ecosystems, with a kind of confidence only people who have never been tested can manage. To the board, they must have seemed exciting, fresh, disruptive. To me, they looked like an investment destined to collapse under the first real strain. One of them, Trey, couldn't have been older than 28. Clean fade haircut, perfect white teeth, smartwatch always tapped or checked as though it meant something. On the third day, I found him in the server staging room, staring at a directory structure on his tablet like he was trying to decipher ancient scripture. "Hey, you're Alara, right?" he asked. I nodded. Cool. Quick question. He rotated the tablet toward me. Is it safe to archive this whole cluster? It hasn't been touched in like 8 months, and it's not labeled, so... My stomach tightened. He was pointing at Sentinel's decoy structure, an intentionally dormant layer designed specifically to mislead anyone digging deeper than they should. Removing it wouldn't break the system outright. but it would trigger Sentinel's self-preservation protocols.
You shouldn't touch that, I said evenly.
It ties to some legacy workflows. Trey smiled the way only the inexperienced and certain do, carefree, dismissive. No worries. Already queued for deletion. Gotta clear out the cobwebs, right? I didn't argue.
I simply walked away. Because what he didn't know, and what no one in Philip's carefully curated, Instagram-ready innovation team knew, was that Sentinel had been trained long ago for this exact moment. When it detected a deletion attempt without the proper credential chain or registered source, Sentinel automatically cloned the targeted structure to a shadow environment, replaced the original directory with a new decoy layer, and rewrote the activity log to show a clean, successful action. So, on Trey's tablet and the internal dashboard, his command read, "Completed." In reality, Sentinel had just prevented a catastrophic, self-inflicted wound to the company's operational spine. And no one, not Philip, not Trey, not Savannah, had the slightest idea. Especially not Savannah. Savannah, who once shadowed me for 6 months. Savannah, who I stayed late to teach how to read legacy logs and fix version conflicts. Savannah, who I had encouraged when she doubted herself. Now she had a new title: Manager of Strategic Systems Transition. She walked the halls confidently, chin lifted, surrounded by Philip's new hires. When we crossed paths, she avoided my eyes. And when she did force a smile, it was polite, thin, performative, as if I had never existed. They weren't just replacing people. They were replacing history with aesthetics. And still, I didn't protest. I didn't correct them. I didn't warn them. Let them talk about digital transformation, product synergy, scalable futures. Let them tear at the system from the outside. Because Sentinel still held the line. And I still held Sentinel. The illusion of control belonged to them. But the architecture, the real architecture, was still mine. That thought followed me as I walked into the demo hall that Thursday morning. The floor had been rearranged. Folding chairs lined in rows, facing the main screen, and I knew they were about to present a future built on something they didn't even understand was already slipping away. The Coffee Shift branded slides cycled on the projector. Innovation Sprint, rethinking the backbone. I recognized the phrase immediately. I had written it years ago in one of my infrastructure overview documents. Now they were using it to dismantle the very system it once described. Philip's team had invited everyone, engineering, ops, even marketing. I wasn't personally invited, but my calendar gained a blanket all-staff welcome event. And someone from HR muttered something about technical presence optics. So, I took a seat in the back, far right corner. Quiet. Detached. Unseen. No nameplate, no introduction. No, good to have you back. Savannah and Trey took the stage together. They looked like they'd been styled for a TED Talk. Polished, energized, perfectly framed under the spotlight. Savannah wore a silk blouse and a smile I once believed in. Trey stood with a remote in one hand and an excess of confidence in the other. Today, we're going to show you where Carrion Technologies is headed, Savannah began. A system that's lighter, faster, and built for scale. We're leaving behind outdated legacy protocols and entering a new digital era. I watched quietly as they navigated through a UI shell I knew better than the roof over my own home. It was just a new coat of paint. The routing logic? Still Sentinel. The security checks? Still Sentinel. The data powering their live demo? Filtered, validated, and protected by Sentinel in real time. The
the very system they were now pretending didn't exist. Then it happened. Trey opened a configuration panel and referred to a subnet scheduler as a floating token distributor. Not just wrong, meaningless. I didn't intend to interrupt. I simply lifted my hand, just a small gesture to clarify terminology and prevent misinformation from hardening into policy. I didn't even speak. Savannah saw me. She paused, and a smile slid onto her face. Not warm, not genuine, just practiced. "Ilara," she said into the microphone, her tone perfectly civil, perfectly final. "We appreciate you being here. But since you're no longer part of the active architecture team, we'd like to keep the floor with the current leads." A few heads turned, not in support, not even in curiosity, just a brief acknowledgement of discomfort. The silence that followed wasn't loud. It was hollow. The kind of silence where everyone decides it's safer to pretend nothing cruel just happened. I nodded. No objection. No resentment. No scene. I stood and walked out. The door clicked shut behind me, soft, decisive. The hallway was quiet, carpet swallowing every step. I walked to the coffee machine in the corner lounge. It sputtered and vibrated as it filled a paper cup. I sat on the gray bench, coffee cooling in my hand, untouched. That's when I noticed him. Jaime, the new admin intern. He stood frozen, holding his phone like it suddenly weighed too much. He had recorded the presentation, not intentionally recording me, but the moment of erasure that the room had collectively agreed to not acknowledge. We made eye contact. He flushed, lowered the phone, and walked away quickly. By the afternoon, the video had passed quietly through a few Slack channels. Near the elevators, I overheard, "Did you see what they did to Ilara? They shut her down in front of everyone." But no one messaged me. No one stopped by. No, "Are you okay?" Just corporate silence. Clean, cold, structurally reinforced. I sat with my coffee a while longer. My badge still worked. Access was restricted, but enough to open Sentinel's admin logs from my phone. Unauthorized protocol rename attempt. 2 failed credential pings. Auto restore complete. Sentinel operational. I closed the log. And I let the humiliation settle. Not as pain, but as data. They could cut me out of the presentation. They could pretend I was gone. But they were still standing on a system I built, and they didn't even know it. The silent signal. No one followed me, not even Savannah. The silence stayed with me as I drove home through the dark. Headlights flashed across the same street signs I'd passed for years. The office lights faded behind me, but the humiliation didn't. It sat in the back seat like a passenger I couldn't shake. When I walked into my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I dropped my bag by the door, kicked off my shoes, and went straight to my desk. The room was still. Only the low hum of the air purifier reminded me that the world hadn't stopped entirely, even if I felt like I had. I opened my laptop. The screen lit my face. My hands moved on instinct. New email draft. Subject: formal resignation effective immediately. I stared at the blank body of the email before beginning to type. To whom it may concern, I am submitting my resignation from Carrion Technologies effective immediately. I am grateful for the opportunities provided and wish the current team continued success. It was clean, professional. Exactly the kind of exit they wanted from me. Silent, polite, forgettable. Halfway through the message, I stopped.
My fingers hovered over the keyboard.
I reread each sentence, and then I erased the entire thing. I wasn't sure if I wanted to leave or if I just wanted the pain to stop. On impulse, I opened the Sentinel admin console. The terminal loaded slowly, the command line blinking with a familiarity that felt almost alive. I had built this console to be private, precise, and irreversible. One line. That was all it would take to erase Sentinel from Carrion's infrastructure, to pull the spine out of the company in one clean movement. I could destroy every thread of code, every log entry, every silent process running under their pretty dashboards. I could take back everything. But my hands wouldn't move. Because if I did this, the ones who would suffer first wouldn't be Philip or Savannah. It would be the night shift techs, the support staff, the clients relying on Sentinel to protect their data, the people trying to hold things together, people like I used to be. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling, and I heard my father's voice. If they don't see you, make sure they feel you in the results. But I had to ask myself, how long was I willing to be unseen? I returned to the terminal. The cursor blinked over the half-typed kill command. I deleted it, closed the console. Instead, I opened Sentinel's activity logs. That's when I saw it. Alert. Unauthorized access attempt detected. Time, 8:14 p.m. Source, unregistered device inside Carrion HQ. I opened the detailed trace. Someone had attempted a root restructure, not maintenance. A takeover attempt. Sentinel had blocked it instantly, just as I designed it to. The request had been cloaked in a spoofed IP. Sloppy, but bold. I traced the origin less than 30 seconds. s.mercer@carriontech.com. Savannah. My jaw tightened, but I didn't speak. Didn't curse. Didn't even blink. 3 years ago, she accidentally leaked financial data to an unsecured server. I covered for her. I fixed it. I protected her. And now she was trying to rewrite the system under her name. Quietly. Surgically. Like I had never existed. I didn't send the resignation. I didn't warn her. Instead, I opened a secondary terminal and typed, Activate Thodonacchio mode. Trace. Unauthorized access log. To shadow channel. Confirm. A single response returned. Monitoring initiated. I closed my laptop. The silence returned. But this time, it wasn't empty. It had direction. And wait. The farewell box. The morning after I activated watch mode on Sentinel, an email from HR landed in my inbox at exactly 8:15 a.m. No greeting. No acknowledgement. Just a sterile directive. Please schedule a time this week to retrieve your personal belongings. A security escort will be provided as per offboarding protocol. It hit harder than I expected. Not because it was surprising, but because of the cold efficiency. 18 years, reduced to a line on someone's checklist. I replied with a single sentence and chose the earliest available slot. Not for them. For me. I needed to close the loop on my own terms. When I arrived at Carrion HQ that afternoon, the lobby lights seemed brighter than usual. Almost aggressively so. As if the building was trying to pretend everything was fine. The receptionist didn't look up. I said my name. A moment later, a young man in a navy blazer approached. Ms. Wynn, I'm Dylan from security. I'll walk you up. We stepped into the elevator. The silence was thick. I could see his reflection in the brushed metal. Awkward. Polite. Maybe even a little sorry for me. I didn't say anything.
I didn't need to. The third floor felt smaller than I remembered. Or maybe it was just no longer mine. Cubicles had been rearranged. A sleek touchscreen now hung where the old project roadmap whiteboard used to be. My office door bore a different name now.
The blinds were drawn halfway. Most of my things had been packed into a medium-sized cardboard box and left on the side table like an afterthought. No one was waiting to greet me. No one said hello. Dylan stayed by the doorway while I stepped inside. In the box were the remnants of nearly 2 decades. My ceramic skyline mug, a couple of notebooks, a photo of my father and me at my college graduation, a flash drive keychain I hadn't seen in years. I opened the desk drawers even though I knew protocol required them to be emptied. The top drawers held nothing but dust and a single bent paperclip. But the bottom drawer stuck slightly. I pulled it open with both hands. Something had slipped behind the drawer panel, a yellow folder, edges warped with age. I slid it out. Inside were diagrams. My diagrams. The original hand-drafted Sentinel architecture. Layer maps, redundancy paths, biometric access logic, node hierarchies, pages of careful, deliberate structure. And in the corner of the first page, faint but unmistakable, E-Win, April 17, 2016. I stared at it. A part of me felt like laughing, not from humor, but from the absurdity of it all. They had tried to replace me. Rewrite the story. Pretend the foundation didn't have a name. And yet here it was, the backbone of their entire company, in my handwriting. This wasn't nostalgia. This was proof. I tucked the folder carefully beneath the mug and the photo inside the box. Dylan shifted slightly, still silent. I nodded when I was ready. We walked back down the hallway, past people who once called me the system's architect, past faces that now turned away instead of meeting my eyes. I didn't resent them. This place trained people to survive by not looking. The elevator ride down was quiet. Back in the lobby, Dylan finally spoke. "Take care, Miss Wynne." I nodded. "You too." When I stepped outside, a cold gust of wind hit my face, the first time in weeks I felt fully awake. I stood there for a moment, box in my arms, breathing in the chill. I did not feel empty. I felt aware, grounded, steady. They thought they were escorting me out like a leftover. But I walked away carrying the one thing they could never rebuild. Lockdown, countdown. And now, I had the proof. I didn't look back as the glass doors shut behind me. Carrion Technologies became nothing more than a fading silhouette in the rear view. I didn't need to turn around. What was coming was already in motion. Crossing the parking lot, carrying 18 years of my life in a cardboard box, my phone buzzed quietly in my coat pocket. I paused beside my car, shielding the screen from the wind. Sentinel log notification. Inactive admin protocol detected. Countdown initiated. Time remaining, 3 hours. No alarms, no warnings, no flashing red banners. Just a quiet signal. I didn't trigger it. I didn't have to. Sentinel always knew the difference between walking away and being forced out. By the time I got home, the sky had turned lavender. The apartment felt still too still. The early winter air made the room echo in a way that reminded me of spaces that used to be full. I set the box down on the table, slid my laptop from the drawer, and powered it on. The familiar startup hum greeted me, not rushed, not eager, just steady, like it always had been. I logged into my private Sentinel console, the one buried under layers of obfuscation, accessible only from a device I manually registered 5 years ago. No back doors, no shared keys, no accidental access. The dashboard opened. Phase 1, Scheduled Access Layer Disruption. 247.36 remaining. Everything looked normal on the surface. System status, stable. Network load, typical. No alerts. But the background processes were already unfolding. Quiet threads slipping into place beneath the visible structure. I leaned back in my chair and took a sip of lukewarm tea from the chipped carrion mug I'd brought home. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt still. Sentinel was never meant to destroy carrion. It was meant to make one thing unmistakably clear. They never owned it. Or me. I opened the hidden command panel. Typed. Initiate layered freeze protocol. Confirm? Yes. This wasn't an explosion. This was a slow suffocation. Sentinel would start by subtly misaligning permission tiers small enough that login attempts failed on the first try. Then, delays in internal schedulers, fractions of a second at first, just enough to feel like a glitch, not a malfunction. Emails would queue but never send. Dashboards would load incompletely. Financial systems would freeze right at the confirmation layer. Disjointed. Untraceable. Annoying. But not catastrophic. The kind of problem that makes every manager say, try again, restart it. Must be the internet. I opened the live monitoring feed. 8:42 p.m. Payroll API delay. Retry scheduled. 8:56 p.m. Login loop timeout. EU West Regional Manager. 9:01 p.m. Financial reconciliation mismatch. Small. Quiet. Perfect. I wasn't here to burn the place to the ground. Not yet. I was here to make them feel the outline of the space where I used to stand. Across the room, the cardboard box sat half open, the yellow folder inside catching a soft glow under the lamp. I didn't need to reread it. I had memorized every structure, every logic chain of Sentinel, years ago. But seeing it physically there was grounding. They walked me out like I was disposable. But I was still in the wiring, still in the server paths, still in the heartbeat of the infrastructure. I typed one final command for the night. If admin reset requested, activate system decoy. Meaning, if they tried to fix anything, Sentinel would hand them a clean, flawless mirror system, a perfect illusion. While the real system continued to freeze, vein by invisible vein. I closed the laptop, walked to the window, watched the streetlights flicker on. The city was quiet, but I wasn't. Domino effect. So was I, quiet, waiting. But tomorrow, they would begin to feel what they could no longer see, and I would be watching every step of it. The first ripple hit just after 9 a.m. From my apartment window, everything looked normal. Traffic crawled along. People walked dogs. Delivery vans double parked like they always did. But inside Carrion, the atmosphere would have already shifted. Not panic, not yet. Just that subtle, uneasy frustration that makes people whisper a little quieter, tap their keyboards a little harder, and hit refresh like it's a prayer. It started in payroll. HR couldn't access the time tracking module anymore. Logins went through, then bounced back to the start page. Input forms froze mid-entry. Someone surely called support and heard the usual tech comfort phrase. Give it 10 minutes and try again. Then the email system began to decay. Message threads broke in the middle. Replies disappeared. Meeting invites showed as sent but never arrived. Some teams reverted to Slack. Others, believe it or not, started calling desk phones like it was 2006. By 10:30 a.m., the CRM platform stopped syncing. Real-time sales projections wouldn't update. Orders already fulfilled showed up as pending. A director in the Boston office threatened to call a client directly, only to discover that the contact directory wouldn't load. And through it all, I watched. Calm. Still. Focused. Sentinel was doing exactly what I designed it to do. Not break the company, just bend it. Layer by layer, until the strain became impossible to ignore. By noon, someone had escalated. A company-wide meeting was called. I couldn't see the room, but I could picture it perfectly. Philip at the front, sleeves rolled up, projecting irritation disguised as authority. Savannah beside him, tight jaw, flipping through half-formed transition roadmap explanations. The quiet static of confusion thick in the air. It must have gone badly, because by 1:15 p.m., her name appeared repeatedly in Sentinel's logs. Attempting access to deprecated environments, running diagnostics with insufficient admin clearance, requesting entry into directories that had been sealed off years ago. Meanwhile, Sentinel's protocol was still only in Phase 2. Just enough damage to disorient them, not enough for them to understand. But then something happened that I didn't expect. At 3:04 p.m., a junior systems engineer, Felix Tran, opened a diagnostic shell and did something almost no one bothers to do anymore. He ran a deep trace scan on the CRM transaction buffer. And he found it. A hidden relay command, not indexed, buried deep beneath the automated routing logic. Sentineloxy.root.log. It was never supposed to appear. But Felix was careful. He tried to open it. Sentinel denied access. He tried again, this time with a limited override. Sentinel didn't shut him out immediately. Instead, it responded, "Secure biometric credential required. Voice signature mismatch." Felix probably assumed it was a leftover test artifact, so he checked the credential owner. And there it was. Plain as daylight. Credential owner, E-Win archived. When the alert hit my own dashboard, I stopped. My hand stayed steady. I didn't touch the keyboard. I just watched the terminal blink patiently, waiting. They had finally stumbled into the skeleton in the walls. Felix didn't have clearance to go further. Sentinel immediately revoked his elevated privileges, flagged the attempt, and dropped him back to standard user mode. I imagined him staring at his screen, brows furrowed, wondering, did I discover something important? Or did I just touch something I shouldn't have? I imagined him glancing over at Savannah, and I imagined Savannah, seeing my name, even half of it, feeling something tighten in her throat. Sentinel restored itself, sealed the access route, buried the log one layer deeper, just far enough to keep the curious at bay. I didn't smile, not yet. But something sparked quietly in my chest. Not revenge, not pride. Something earned. They were beginning to feel it. The slowing, the fractures, the loss of control. And no matter how many consultants they called, how many firewalls they stacked, how desperately they tried to pin the problems somewhere else, they would never reach the core. Because the core was me. And I never gave them the keys. I closed the laptop gently as the clock hit 4. Outside, the wind picked up the kind that precedes a storm. The building hadn't fallen, but the first domino had, and the rest were already leaning. Another domino had fallen, and the table was starting to shake. By the next morning, the cracks were no longer subtle, they were unmistakable. Carrion's systems weren't just slow anymore. They were failing. The polished illusion of control Philip had tried so hard to maintain was peeling away, layer by layer. Even from miles away, I could feel the panic rippling through the building like static. They had spent the entire previous day chasing ghosts, restarting workstations, calling vendors, blaming old hardware, But today they understood. This wasn't going to fix itself. And it wasn't going away. I knew Philip well enough to predict his next move. At 8:20 a.m., Sentinel's observer logs confirmed it. A new block of encrypted external IPs had been granted temporary clearance. He had brought in outside help, a cybersecurity response team out of DC, based on their device metadata and routing signatures. The intent was obvious. Wipe everything. Factory reset. Start over from zero. But Sentinel wasn't something you could reboot like a crashed laptop. It had safeguards. And more importantly, it had me. I watched through my console as the external team began their probe. They started with surface scans, malware sweeps, bandwidth mapping. Then they dug deeper, brushing dangerously close to Sentinel's outer shell. It took them less than 20 minutes to realize something didn't fit any structure they'd seen before. By 9:05 a.m., one of their lead engineers, Jared Maddox, according to the login trails, flagged a hidden process thread buried beneath Carrion's real-time analytics engine. I could imagine the scene perfectly. A cluster of consultants leaning over one screen, hushed voices, narrowed eyes. No one wanting to be the first to say, "We don't know what we're looking at." Then Jared attempted a bypass. He wrote a custom script to pierce through the nested virtual partitions. On his fourth attempt, Sentinel responded not with a lockout, but with a soft containment route. A polite, controlled warning. You're getting too close. But Jared didn't stop. On the fifth attempt, his script began a brute force simulation, hammering through fake access paths, tracing decoys, testing deeper thread responses until it brushed dangerously close to Sentinel's access seed, the cryptographic fingerprint that leads to the core. For one brief second, I felt something I wasn't expecting. A sharp, tight exhale of worry. He was clever. Clever enough to almost see the architecture for what it was. I held my breath as the script compiled. And then Sentinel moved. Access anomaly detected. Unrecognized administrative authority. Revoking permissions. In less than a second, Jared's credentials were erased. Every clearance, every alias, every trace of internal access wiped from the system tree. It was as though he had never touched the network at all. His screen went black, then rebooted without him. I exhaled slowly. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was disappointment. Because for just a moment, I had hoped that someone might understand what Sentinel truly was. Not to break it, not to claim it, but to see the elegance in how it lived beneath everything. But like all the others, Jared had come to dismantle, not to learn. Still, there was something grounding in Sentinel's response. Clean, immediate, protective. It remembered its purpose, even when everyone else had forgotten the person who built it. Inside Carrion, tensions spiked. Team leads demanded to know why their emergency consultant had vanished mid-investigation. Philip ordered a temporary lockdown on all admin-level terminals. Savannah tried to move the probe in-house, but it was already too late. The narrative had shifted. This was no longer a system hiccup. This was something intentional, something controlled, something or someone they couldn't see. I stood up, walked to the window, and let the early sunlight fall across my face. It had rained that morning, and the pavement outside shimmered gold. For the first time in weeks, I let myself feel something real. Hope. Not because they were failing, but because the truth was finally rising to the surface. I had never wanted to hurt Korean. I had only ever wanted to be seen. And now, one failed reset at a time, they were finally starting to look in the right direction. I knew it was only a matter of time before Philip stopped chasing phantoms in server logs and started pointing fingers at the person he feared most. What I didn't expect was how quickly he would turn to blame and how brazen he would be about it. It started late Thursday afternoon. A notification hit my personal inbox. The subject line was sterile. Notice of legal inquiry, Carrion Technologies. For half a second, I thought it might have been sent to me by mistake. Then I opened the PDF. Inside was a formal accusation drafted by Carrion's internal legal department and co-signed by an external law firm. It claimed that I had intentionally compromised system infrastructure, injected malicious code, violated post-termination confidentiality, retained proprietary technology without authorization. The language was corporate and cold, dense paragraphs of legal phrasing, all circling the same implication. They were accusing me of sabotage. They never used my name directly. No one would be reckless enough to put that in writing this early. But I wasn't naive. It was me. My hands went cold as I scrolled. Threats of litigation. Demands for written explanation. A directive to cease any and all contact with Carrion Systems. I sat very still. The anger didn't come in flames. It came slowly, dense, heavy, pressurized. They had fired me in front of an entire leadership team. They tried to erase me from the system I built. Now they were trying to destroy me entirely. But under the anger, there was clarity, too, because I had something they didn't. I stood and crossed the room to the shelf beside my desk. I pulled down the cardboard box I'd brought home 5 days earlier. Beneath the coffee mug and the framed photograph was the yellow folder. I opened it carefully. There it was. The original Sentinel blueprint, drawn in ink, annotated in pencil. Every relay node, every protocol tier, every failsafe sequence. In the bottom right corner, E-Win, April 17, 2016, Brooklyn, New York. This wasn't a company document. It wasn't part of a Carrion contract. It was mine. I didn't build Sentinel for Carrion. I brought Sentinel to Carrion, integrated it on my own private relay servers, independent of their infrastructure, never once installed on a company-owned core. And I had proof. Original file metadata. Server hosting invoices. Registration certificates for the private cluster. A drafted but never executed licensing agreement securing my ownership. All of it stored in my encrypted archive for 6 years. I had been the architect, the operator, the quiet guardian. And now, for the first time, I would become its defender. I called my attorney someone who had helped me with intellectual property protections years ago. She knew my work well enough to understand the gravity. After I forwarded the legal notice and my documentation, she called back almost instantly. "Philip doesn't understand what he just stepped into," she said. "This isn't just a weak accusation. It's dangerously close to defamation. And you have irrefutable proof." I exhaled, slowly, deeply. Not relief. Not victory. Just the weight shifting back into my hands where it always belonged. The next morning, my attorney sent Carrion's legal team a response. Clear, professional, unshaken. Attached was a high-resolution scan of the original Sentinel architecture, signed and dated, along with supporting records of independent ownership. And suddenly, their silence became louder than any accusation they had sent. They tried to cast me as the villain in the collapse. But they forgot one critical truth. You don't accuse the architect of burning down the building when she's the one who laid every brick. The cracks had reached the top floors, and they were just beginning to feel the weight. After a week of operational collapse, frozen payroll, corrupted client records, failed recovery attempts, and a legal threat that blew up in their own hands, Carrion's board was out of moves. They scheduled a closed-door meeting with major investors on Friday morning. Officially, it was meant to reassure confidence. In reality, it became the moment everything came undone. 9 a.m. The conference room lights dimmed. Dozens of faces appeared on the wall of screens. Manhattan, Zurich, Tokyo. Someone awake well past midnight just to be here. These weren't people who cared about network architecture. They cared about deliverables, quarterlies, market stability. But today, there was only one word on the table. Sentinel. I wasn't in the room. I didn't need to be. Sentinel's monitoring interface was open on my laptop at home, quietly tracking every login, every shared document, every internal chat. It had been granted access automatically when Savannah uploaded a transparency audit file to brief the board without realizing Sentinel could see everything inside it. Philip stood at the head of the table. Rigid posture, practiced tone. A script he had clearly rehearsed until dawn. He blamed the outages on legacy infrastructure, a technical inheritance from the previous era. A slow decay the team was already in the process of addressing. A few investors nodded. Someone wrote a note. Then one question split the room in half. A calm, deep American voice from the upper right screen. Who owns Sentinel? Philip froze. I'm sorry? The voice repeated, slower. Is Sentinel proprietary to Carrion, or is it subcontracted? Its system footprint does not match the architecture outlined in our last technology review. Silence. Philip tried to steady himself. Sentinel was developed internally, years ago, maintained under our systems division. Another silence, this one heavier, slower, deliberate. The speaker's name glowed on the display. Elliot Crane, Senior Equity Partner, Havenbrook Capital. Not just an investor, the investor. The man whose funding kept Korean alive when it should have collapsed years ago. The table moved when he moved. Elliot leaned closer to the camera. I met Ilara Wynn 3 years ago at the Q3 partner luncheon in Boston. She sketched a data relay model on a napkin. The logic in that sketch matches Sentinel exactly. Savannah went still. Philip's face drained pale. Investors exchanged glances. Elliot continued, voice steady. I remember what she said, quoting her, "It's the nervous system beneath all the noise. No one sees it, but it keeps everything alive." He paused. And I still have that napkin, with her signature. The air in the room shifted like something heavy had just landed. Someone finally asked, "So Sentinel isn't ours?" Elliot's expression didn't change, but something in his tone did. I'm beginning to wonder if it was ever ours. From my apartment, I watched Sentinel record every frame, every word. I didn't smile. Not yet. But my jaw loosened. My hands, which had been clenched for days, finally opened. For the first time, someone with power spoke my name and attached it to what I built, not what they tried to blame on me. Philip stammered through a weak answer about missing documentation and internal review points.
But it didn't matter. You cannot lie to the man who funds the building. The meeting ended 20 minutes early. No resolutions.
No soothing statements. Just questions.
Big, expensive questions. When the feed ended, I sat in the quiet of my living room, sunlight cutting through the blinds like new edges forming in the air. This silence was not exile anymore.
It was balance returning. They had tried to bury me, but the structure they were standing on was built from my blueprint, my architecture, my mind.
And now finally, someone had turned the spotlight toward the truth.
It wasn't revenge that I felt. It was recognized. Recognition that had been overdue for a very long time.
Just 2 days after the investor meeting, I received an offer. Not from a major corporation, not from a billion-dollar unicorn, not from any company with flashy branding or PR spin. It came from a quiet, steadily growing startup in Boston, one I had advised years ago when they were still working out of a shared loft, folding tables, and borrowed Wi-Fi.
The founder, Ava Lynn, had been a junior systems engineer then barely 30, sharp-minded, curious, and far more grounded than most of the VPs I had worked with at Carrion. Now she is CEO, and she wanted me to come on as Chief Technology Officer. The email was simple.
We're building something that deserves to last. We want you to build its brain. Are you in? I didn't hesitate. This company didn't have the money Carrion had, but it had something far more valuable.
Integrity.
Curiosity. And the humility to know what it didn't know.
This was the kind of place Sentinel had always deserved to belong to.
I accepted quietly. No announcement, no victory lap, no need for noise. And then I renamed the system. Sentinel_1. Built on trust. Reborn in silence. This time, it wouldn't live in the shadows. It would be the backbone by design, not by accident. We rebuilt the core engine, keeping the strongest architecture and removing every legacy constraint Carrion had ever attached to it. My new team didn't ask, "How do we sell this?" They asked, "How do we protect people with it?" For the first time in years, I wasn't guarding something alone. Meanwhile, Carrion unraveled. The investor board froze spending. Client confidence dropped. Quiet articles appear in niche tech journals. Phrases like critical architecture mismanagement and loss of internal system sovereignty begin circulating.
The stock fell, then fell again.
Savannah was quietly removed from public-facing roles. Philip disappeared from internal communications entirely. An interim CTO was brought in from finance, of all places. It was only a matter of time. I didn't celebrate. I didn't interfere. But I didn't look away either. 1 week after Sentinel-1 launched its 5th beta client, I stood on the rooftop of a co-working building downtown finishing a call. The wind was cold. The city skyline was quiet. From there, I could see Carrion headquarters glass, metal, spotless. But I could also see the flickering lights on the 12th floor, the half-empty parking lot at mid-morning, the subtle collapse from the inside out. The empire I once held together was breaking under its own arrangement. I smiled. Not out of spite, not out of victory. Just enough. Because I knew something they had never understood. You can fire a title, but you can't erase the mind that built the foundation. Real power doesn't have to shout. Sometimes,
It simply outlasts the noise.
If you've ever been overlooked, replaced, or dismissed, only to rise again stronger, this story is for you. If it resonates, share it. Someone else may need to hear it. Because some systems may go down, but the right ones always restart.